Lawrence. I teach communication at Pepperdine University, and here's a really fun comm theory for you to help you be aware of how you're communicating interculturally. So this is communication accommodation theory, and basically it talks about how when you encounter a person from another culture, you can do one of two things. You can choose to converge or you can choose to diverge. Now, when you choose to converge, that means that you begin to adopt the other person's pattern of speech, and you try to really connect with that person as an individual. So I notice when I talk to my mama, who's from the South, my voice slows down a little bit. I speak louder so that she can hear me, things like that. It's really subtle, but it just means you relate to that person and you want to connect with that person. Convergence is a really good thing. The other thing you can do is you can diverge. And there's 3 different ways that you can diverge. The first is called maintenance. That's where no matter what, you're going to maintain your style of communication. It doesn't matter what kind of words the other person uses. It doesn't matter if, like, maybe you're in a culture where it's acceptable for men to hug each other and you're not cool with that. You're just going to maintain your style of communication. And that can be really good if you want to keep your own individual sense, but it's not very welcoming. So that's maintenance. You can also over-accommodate, and over-accommodation is when you're trying really, really hard to converge with the other person, but the problem is you're going off of stereotypes. And so you are working too hard to connect with that person. You're using language that is really uncomfortable. You're going out of your way. You know, maybe like you see an elderly person and you start speaking really loudly because clearly they can't hear you. And it's like, no, like just get to know that person. You don't need to assume just because they are a certain way that they communicate a certain way. So we have maintenance, we have over-accommodation, and the third thing that you can do is called self-handicapping. And self-handicapping is when you use your culture as an excuse for not being able to accommodate the other person. So I always pull out the girl card. Like whenever my cars run down or something, I'm like, oh, I'm a girl, I can't deal with this, I need a guy to help me. Or you might say, well, I'm just an American, or I'm just this is foreign to me, so I can't handle that. And so you're using your culture as an excuse, and it prevents you from really connecting to the other person. So obviously the goal when you are doing mission work is to connect with that other person. And I would really encourage you to look at those people as individuals and to see how you can adapt and adjust your communication so that you are really welcoming and accommodating them. So the Bible is full of so many great stories of this, like when Paul is in Athens and he talks about the unknown God, and he shows them that this God that you've been worshiping is a lot like our God, and you had no idea. Or, you hear stories of how maybe it makes sense in one culture to say, like, Jesus is the bread of life, but in another culture it makes more sense to use, like, a different type of grain because that's what they use. So just be thinking of that. How can you use their language? How can you use their culture in order to connect with them? So that's communication accommodation theory.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so once again, I'm Caitlin Lawrence, and this is your final comm theory to help you on your way. So this is called the attribution theory. And basically an attribution is when you assign meaning to another person's behavior. And oftentimes we can fall into the fundamental attribution error, particularly when we're dealing with people from another culture. So this is how it works. Basically, whenever you do something positive, we tend to ascribe it to an internal characteristic. So, for example, if you do the dishes without being asked, it's because you are an amazing person. You're just naturally nice. If, however, you do something that's negative, then if you fall into the fundamental attribution error, you tend to ascribe it to an external force. So if you didn't do the dishes, it's because you were too busy. It's because you didn't have enough time. It's because your roommate was the one that messed the dishes up, so it wasn't your job. The opposite is true for other people. So if another person does something that you deem to be bad, if you fall into the fundamental attribution error, you ascribe it to an internal characteristic. So if your roommate doesn't do the dishes, it's because he or she is lazy, they are careless, they don't think about other people. If that other person does something positive, then you tend to ascribe it to an external characteristic. So your roommate does the dishes, well, it's because they have more time, or it's because their parents trained them correctly, or something like that. And there can be a huge danger in falling into the fundamental attribution error, especially when dealing with different cultures, because you can start playing off of stereotypes. So if you see a person who's driving poorly, instead of attributing it to, oh, maybe he or she is having a bad day, or maybe they're really frustrated or frazzled, it can be, well, it's because they are this certain nationality, or it's because they're a bad person, they don't know better. And so it's really easy to fall into this fundamental attribution error and to think that you are better than other people. And I know for me in my personal life, it's really been helpful to, when I start jumping to those conclusions, to step back and to see, okay, what external factor could be at play here? Maybe, it's not that that person's lazy or that person's trying to frustrate me. Maybe it's because that person had a hard day. And so really when you step into the other person's shoes and try to see the perspective from their point of view, you're able to make sure that you don't fall into this fundamental attribution error.
Okay, would you just tell me your first and last name and your experience on the mission field?
I'm Beth Allers, and I've been interested in missions since I was a child. My father used to bring missionaries into the home all the time as I was growing up, and I was in 11th grade and went to Guadalajara, Mexico. I spent a few months in Quebec, Canada. Last year I went to India with a prophetic group, and so we did pastors' conferences and did prophetic ministry with the pastors there. Then when I was in college, I went to Taiwan, taught English for a few months in a church setting, but all with unchurched people. And lived with a Chinese-speaking family. And then I had, years of raising a family, and then when my children started becoming teens, I wanted to give them the experience. So we took our two oldest to Bolivia a few years ago. It was a construction project, and no English speakers, so we learned a lot of Spanish, and we've been continuing to do that for the past few years with our family. Now I just love the whole world. So wherever the Lord leads, we're eager to go. Some ideas are that if you haven't been to a third world country before, or cross-cultural situations, in the months before going, go visit other churches that have a diversity of people that you can meet, or visit home groups where you could actually interact and talk with people from various backgrounds. And if there's other situations where you could tutor in English, you get to talk to people and ask them about their country. What was that other one I was saying? Read books, read missionary biographies, watch movies, and do some research on the country that you're going to. A lot of it is a learner's mindset. So you learn before you go, and then when you're there, enter the situation with humility and looking at the people as people made in God's image and exhibiting the light of God in a different variation than we're familiar with, and that you can learn and appreciate the design of God made in God's people, made in God's image from a different angle. Philippians 2 is one of my favorite passages for having the attitude of Christ everywhere we go. The attitude of Christ in Philippians 2 is his attitude of serving, humility, looking to being united in spirit, intent on one purpose, and maintaining the same love. Finding connection with the people of another culture in spirit, because we're all made in the image of God, and there's so much to learn from one another. And so when you encounter situations that are uncomfortable or just very different, go with the flow and see what God wants to do in it, and look for the beauty and the fun and the memories. So if things are hard, unexpected, the flexibility and the mindset of serving and looking for what's the beauty in it and what is God doing here will help you to adjust.
I'm Abby Allers, and I've been to Bolivia 3 years in a row. Leave a bunch of your troubles behind and practice being humble, and just try to see how their life is and try to relate. We're going to do a baptism with the church, and a bus was too expensive, so our pastor rented a cattle truck. And they tried to clean it out, but there was still a bunch of manure in it. It was really gross. And like the Bolivians were like, "Oh yay, it's gonna be an adventure, you know, woohoo! It's gonna be awesome, 3-hour cattle truck ride each way to go to a river," which was just a big mud puddle. But it was one of those things where you just have to go with the flow and not think about your surroundings, but think about the quality time you have with the people there and your experience to get to know them better and bond with them for those 3 interesting hours on the cattle truck. That was definitely a highlight.